They didn't lower their voices when they talked about him. They never did. Just leave it, he'll handle it. A folder hit the floor hard enough to explode into loose pages. The sound echoed through the hallway like a slap. Laughter followed. Quick, casual, practiced. Samuel didn't look up. He didn't sigh. He didn't protest. He simply set the mop against the wall, bent down, and began picking up each page as if it mattered. Someone stepped over his hand on purpose. "Careful," a man muttered, not as a warning, but as a joke. Samuel's fingers paused for half a second, not because it hurt, because it reminded him that they could do anything around him and still feel clean. They could be cruel and still feel professional. They could belittle him and still walk into meetings like they were good people. He gathered the last page, smoothed the crease, and stacked everything neatly on the chair. Then he stood up and returned to the mop. Across the wall, through a door that didn't fully close, applause erupted, a crowd cheering, a voice on a microphone, a name being praised for a project Samuel had once built in silence. He kept cleaning. That was how his nights went. That was how most of his life had begun to feel, like a room he was always responsible for, but never allowed to belong in. His name was Samuel Ward. Most people in the building didn't know that. They called him maintenance, like it was a person instead of a department, like he had no past, no story, no identity outside of keys and trash bags and a cart filled with tools. Samuel had once worked upstairs, not in the way people would assume when they glanced at him now, not as an executive, not as someone born into the kind of confidence that made doors open, but he had been a systems coordinator for a mid-sized tech firm before that firm was bought, rebranded, and moved into this polished building downtown. He had been the quiet one in meetings, the one who spoke last, only when he was sure. He didn't sell ideas, he built them. He solved problems nobody wanted to admit existed. And then, one morning, he walked into the office and found his desk empty. Not cleaned, not moved, erased. A polite email followed. Cold language. Restructuring. Realignment. Appreciation for your contributions. His manager didn't look him in the eye when he delivered the news in person. The man acted like Samuel had become contagious. "Oh, we're cutting positions," he said. "It's not personal." It was always personal when it happened to you. Samuel wasn't fired in a dramatic way. He wasn't escorted out. He wasn't humiliated in public. His removal was quiet. So quiet it almost felt like it didn't count, like he didn't have the right to be angry because no one had shouted at him. But the impact was brutal. He had a wife then. Not anymore. Not because she was cruel, because life doesn't always wait for people to recover. Medical bills had piled up from her mother's illness. Their savings disappeared. Samuel's next job paid less, then less. And eventually, the only work he could get quickly was a maintenance contract through a service company that sent him to this very building. At first he told himself it was temporary. He told himself he just needed time. Then time passed, and the story people believed about him became the only story they were willing to see. Samuel learned quickly how the building worked. Upstairs was bright, glass walls, whiteboards, espresso machines, people with lanyards and opinions and steady paychecks. Downstairs was narrow hallways, storage rooms, boiler spaces, and back entrances where nobody looked up because looking up would mean acknowledging what they preferred not to think about. The building was full of invisible labor. Samuel was just the most visible part of it because he moved through their world like a stain they didn't want on the carpet. He didn't fight it, not because he lacked pride, because he had learned that fighting didn't always change the outcome. Sometimes it only gave people a reason to push harder. He became the man who fixed problems before anyone had time to complain. He replaced light fixtures at dawn. He reattached door hinges that had been kicked loose by impatient feet. He cleaned spills in conference rooms where million-dollar deals were discussed like the people signing them were gods. He kept the place running, and still, they treated him like a shadow. There was a woman named Claire who worked at the front desk. She was polite, not warm, but not cruel. She'd nod at Samuel sometimes, the way people nodded at the weather. She was the closest thing he had to a human interaction that didn't feel like a test. "Morning," she'd say. "Morning," Samuel would answer. That was all. The rest of the building didn't bother. They left messes on purpose. They joked about him as if he couldn't hear. Sometimes they spoke directly to him like he was a misbehaving pet. "Hey, could you do something about the smell in the break room?" "It's called cleaning," someone laughed. "Don't worry, he loves it, right?" Samuel would nod. He would walk away. He would do the job properly. Because doing it properly was the only part of his life he still controlled. The break happened in small pieces, not all at once. A comment here, a glance there, a day when someone refused to let him use the elevator because it's for employees. He was an employee too, but not the kind they meant. One afternoon, a regional director visited. The building was tense. Everyone walked faster, smiled harder, like their faces were being graded. Samuel was cleaning near the auditorium doors when the director passed by with a group of managers. He heard the director's voice, loud and confident. This place runs like a machine, the director said. Who's maintaining your operations? Great work. A manager laughed. Oh, we've got maintenance, he said, waving his hand vaguely toward Samuel without looking at him. They handle the dirty stuff. The director smiled like it was charming. Samuel kept scrubbing. Then someone dropped a cup of coffee right beside him. Intentional, careless. The dark liquid spread across the floor and crawled toward the wall like a stain trying to escape. A young analyst stood there with a blank expression. Oops, he said. Can you get that? I'm late. Samuel looked at the coffee, then up at the analyst. Their eyes met. The analyst's face shifted just slightly. Not guilt, not shame, impatience. Samuel felt something tighten in his chest. Not rage, not even sadness. A clear, cold understanding. This was what they believed he was worth. He cleaned the spill. Then he stayed late to scrub the smell out of the carpet, because if he didn't, they'd complain tomorrow and act like it was his fault. That night, he sat in the maintenance room with his hands resting on his knees. The building was quiet except for the distant hum of air conditioning. He stared at the wall for a long time, and he thought about leaving. Not quitting, not storming out, not making a scene, just disappearing. He imagined the hallway tomorrow without him, the trash overflowing, the doors sticking, the lights flickering, people annoyed, confused, demanding answers. Then he imagined how quickly they'd hire someone else and forget his name again. That was the part that made his throat tighten. Not the disrespect, the ease with which he could be replaced in their minds after years of carrying the building on his back. He didn't cry, he didn't throw anything. He stood up, washed his hands slowly, and went back to work. That was his strength. Not dramatic endurance, but the quiet refusal to collapse. Years passed like that, the kind of years that don't look important until you realize they changed everything. Samuel grew older in the corners of that building. His hair thinned, his hands became rougher, his knees hurt more. He learned which floorboards creaked, which doors needed extra pressure, which managers liked to pretend they didn't see him. He also learned the building's systems better than anyone. The security panels, the network closets, the backup generators, the server cooling units tucked behind locked doors, most employees didn't even know existed. He wasn't trained for all of it. He taught himself. Not because someone asked, because he couldn't stop being the kind of man who understood things deeply, even when nobody cared. At home, his life was smaller. A one-bedroom apartment, a quiet routine, cheap dinners. No pictures on the walls except one old photo he couldn't throw away. Him in his earlier years, wearing a company badge, standing beside a team he used to believe was his. Sometimes he stared at that photo and wondered if he had imagined that life. Sometimes he wondered if he had done something wrong. And sometimes, late at night, he admitted the truth to himself. He wasn't invisible because he deserved it. He was invisible because people liked convenience more than conscience. The judgment came openly after a while. New hires made jokes. Older employees ignored him. Some acted irritated if he dared to share an elevator. One manager, a man named Randall, was the worst. Randall didn't insult Samuel loudly. He didn't need to. He had mastered a cruelty that stayed within the boundaries of professional. He'd call Samuel buddy, with a smile that meant the opposite. He'd assign tasks at the worst times. He'd complain about Samuel's work even when it was flawless. One day, Randall stopped Samuel in the hall. You ever think about doing more? He asked, like he was offering advice. Samuel paused. I do my job, Samuel said. Randall laughed softly. Yeah, that's the problem. You only do your job. He walked away as if he had delivered wisdom. Samuel stood there, feeling the words sink in like rain through clothing. He knew what Randall meant. He meant, stay in your place. It would have been easier if the building had broken him all at once. But it didn't. It wore him down slowly, in a way that made him question whether the pain was even real. Then came the almost ruin. It started with an email, a restructuring announcement, outsourcing contracts, cost reductions, efficiency upgrades, the kind of words executives love because they sounded clean. Samuel's name appeared on a list of positions under review. He read it twice, then a third time. His mouth felt dry. He folded the paper and put it in his pocket. That night, he went home and sat at his small kitchen table without turning on the TV, without making dinner, without doing anything except listening to the silence. He realized something that scared him more than losing the job. He realized he didn't know what else he was anymore. The job wasn't just money, it was routine. It was purpose, however invisible. It was the one place his discipline still mattered. If it vanished, what would be left? The next day, Samuel returned to work like nothing had happened. He didn't ask questions. He didn't beg. He didn't appeal. He made a decision the way he always did. Silently, he began documenting everything. Not out of revenge, not to expose anyone, because he knew what the building was and how fragile it truly was beneath its polished surface. He knew the systems no one else understood. He knew the risks they ignored because ignoring was easier than learning. He wrote down maintenance histories, security inconsistencies, electrical vulnerabilities, server cooling issues that had been patched and repatched with quick fixes. He didn't tell anyone. He simply prepared. Weeks passed. Then the night came when preparation became the only thing that mattered. It was a Friday, late. The building was nearly empty except for a small team working on a deadline upstairs. Samuel was finishing his rounds when the lights flickered twice, subtle, like a blink. He stopped. He listened. The sound of the ventilation shifted slightly, not loud, just wrong. He walked toward the server corridor where most employees never went. The door was supposed to be locked, but it was ajar. A maintenance contractor had been there earlier, leaving carelessness behind. Samuel stepped inside. The air was warmer than it should have been. Warning lights blinked on the cooling unit. A low alarm beeped, quiet enough that no one upstairs would hear it until it was too late. Samuel's stomach tightened. If the cooling failed completely, the servers would overheat. The building's systems would crash. Security locks, data access, everything. And it wouldn't just be inconvenience. It would be a disaster. He checked the panel. A pressure drop, a failing component, something that had been temporary too many times. Samuel reached for his radio to call someone. Then he stopped. Who would he call? The on-call technician wasn't in the building. The outsourced support line would take hours. Randall would blame him. Someone would yell. By the time approvals were granted, damage would be done. Samuel looked at the blinking lights. Then he made his choice. He stayed. He worked through the night with the calm of someone who had spent years being dismissed. He rerouted the cooling flow. He stabilized the unit. He pulled spare parts from storage, improvising a solution that would hold until morning. He moved carefully, deliberately, like a surgeon in a room no one respected enough to acknowledge. Around 3 a.m, the unit stopped alarming. The air cooled. The blinking lights steadied. Samuel leaned against the wall and breathed out slowly. He could have gone home right then. Instead, he kept working. He reinforced the fix. He double-checked connections. He documented everything because he knew someone would later ask what happened, and if he didn't have proof, they would rewrite the story. At sunrise, the building woke as if nothing had happened. People arrived with coffee and confidence. They logged in. They smiled. They complained about traffic. No one knew how close everything had been to collapsing. Samuel went to the maintenance room and washed his hands. He looked at himself in the mirror. His eyes were tired, his face older. But there was something else there, too. A quiet certainty. 2 hours later, the auditorium filled. Emergency meeting. Executives on stage. Randall in the front row, jaw tight, whispering to someone. Claire at the back desk, eyes wide. The chief operations officer spoke into the microphone. "Last night, we narrowly avoided a catastrophic systems failure," she said. "One that could have shut down operations for days." Whispers spread through the room like smoke. The COO continued. "We need to know who intervened, who identified the failure and corrected it before damage occurred." Silence. Then someone from IT stood up, confused. "We didn't," he admitted. "We weren't alerted." The COO frowned. "Then who was in the server corridor?" Security footage was pulled. A video appeared on the screen. Samuel, entering the corridor with his cart. Samuel, working alone. Samuel, moving through the room like he belonged there, like he understood it better than anyone. The room went still. Randall turned slowly in his seat, eyes narrowing as if he couldn't accept what he was seeing. The COO's voice softened slightly. "Who was that?" No one answered immediately. Then Claire spoke from the back, quiet but clear. "That's Samuel," she said. "Maintenance?" The word maintenance landed differently this time. The COO stared at the screen, then looked out at the crowd. "Bring him here," she said. Samuel didn't realize he was being called until Claire approached him in the hallway, her face tense. "They want you," she said. Samuel blinked. "Who?" "Everyone," she whispered. He walked into the auditorium feeling like he was stepping into someone else's world again. Heads turned, people stared. Some looked uncomfortable, like they had just been forced to remember they had a conscience. Samuel stopped near the front. The COO stepped down from the stage and approached him. "You did this?" she asked, gesturing to the screen. Samuel nodded. "The cooling unit was failing." "How long have you been familiar with our infrastructure?" she asked. Samuel hesitated. He could have lied. He could have made it sound smaller, safer, less threatening. But his silence had already carried him too far to pretend. "I've been familiar with it for years," he said. Randall stood up abruptly. "He's not authorized to be in that corridor," he snapped. "That door should have been locked. This is a security violation." The COO looked at Randall without blinking. "Was it locked?" she asked. Randall's mouth opened, then closed. The COO turned back to Samuel. "If you hadn't intervened, what would have happened?" Samuel's voice remained calm. "You would have lost the servers," he said. "Security access would have failed. Data systems would have overheated. You'd be down for days, maybe longer." The room was silent again. Then the COO asked the question that changed the air. "Why do you know this?" she said. Samuel breathed once, slowly, because it was time. Not for speech, not for revenge, not for theatrics, just for the truth. Because I helped design the original system, he said. A wave moved through the room, not loud, just the sound of people processing something they didn't want to admit. That the man they had stepped over, dismissed, mocked, and ignored, had been carrying something far bigger than a mop. Randall's face drained of color. The COO's eyebrows lifted slightly. You designed it? Samuel nodded. Before the acquisition, he said, I worked on the infrastructure planning. Then I was reassigned. Eventually I left. Then I came back through the service contract. The COO stared at him for a long moment. You've been here all this time, she said, quieter now, and nobody knew. Samuel didn't correct her. They knew enough. They just didn't care enough to ask. The COO turned toward the audience. How many of you have walked past this man without learning his name? She asked. No one spoke. The question didn't need an answer. The COO faced Samuel again. What do you want? She asked. It wasn't a trap. It wasn't pity. It sounded like a real question. Samuel felt the room waiting, hungry for a dramatic response. He didn't give them one. He looked at his hands. Rough, scarred, honest. I want the system fixed properly, he said. Not patched, not delayed, properly. A pause. Then he added quietly, and I want to be employed directly, not outsourced. The COO nodded once. Done, she said. Randall's mouth tightened. Samuel didn't smile. Not because he wasn't relieved, because this wasn't a victory parade. It was a correction, long overdue. After the meeting, people approached him. Some apologized, awkwardly. Some tried to laugh like they'd always been friendly. Some avoided him completely, ashamed. Samuel listened. He nodded. He moved through the hallway with the same calm pace he always had, but something was different. Not the building, not the people. Him. He walked past the corridor where the folder had once been dropped at his feet. He stopped there for a moment and looked at the tiles. They were clean, shining, silent. He realized something that felt almost like grief. He hadn't been working in silence because he was weak. He had been working in silence because he was strong enough to endure without applause. And the thing he had built in those years wasn't just a repaired building, it was himself. That night, Samuel left at a normal hour. He stepped outside into the evening air and stood still for a moment, letting the city noise surround him. The world didn't change all at once. But for the first time in years, his presence felt real. Not because they finally noticed, because he no longer needed them to. There are people who don't demand to be seen, they keep going anyway. And when the truth finally surfaces, it doesn't arrive like thunder. It arrives like a door opening that should have never been closed.